Gil Cedillo, and we are prepared with a quorum to begin this meeting. We have a lot of substantive discussion today, and I want to thank everybody who's here, and I really want to thank everybody who's been engaged in this process. You may have read the articles that were in the LA Times about the model in San Francisco, and I want to applaud everybody who's here, both landlords and renters, building owners and renters, for participating in the process. It is not easy to be engaged in governance. It requires compromise and commitment, and all of you have participated in that. I am actually very proud, Mr. Dawson Hayes, of the engagement that's taken place by the participants here, because I think we're going to get a better model than the city of San Francisco, one that will be more fair, more equitable, but clearly one that's going to be a product of a kind of collective process, an engaged process. And that's not easy because arguably you could say there's two sides here, and people feel very strongly about their positions and they're very passionate about it. But at the end of the day, we want to do what's best for all the residents of the city of Los Angeles, regardless of your status. And we want to create a scenario in where we have an environment that is safe and sound and as proactive as can be, so that we can ensure that when the inevitable earthquake does come, that we've done all that we can to position ourselves to protect our physical infrastructure, our environment, to be more specific, the homes, the houses, the apartments where people live, that we can do the things that will avert the type of tragedies that we had to respond to in Northridge, and that by our proactive engagement, that we won't have the tragedies that we were confronted with. And so with that, we are prepared to go forward with item 1.
Item 1, Mr. Chair, is a city attorney report and ordinance relative to mandating seismic retrofits of existing wood frame soft story buildings and existing non-ductile concrete buildings.
Okay, so can we get the city attorney to give us an overview of the ordinance, and then talk to us about some of the technical amendments that you prepared for us today.
Good afternoon, council members. Monica Castillo with the City Attorney's Office. We present to you today an ordinance that implements the Mayor's December 2015 Resilience by Design report. And specifically what it does is it mandates retrofit standards for soft story buildings and non-ductile concrete buildings that were generally given permits in the mid-1970s. This also provides for compliance timelines that owners need to meet. It establishes certain enforcement mechanisms for building and safety to implement and reach those goals. And it also makes amendments to the city's housing code to allow the Rental Adjustment Commission to modify notice and service requirements of the Tenant Habitability program, and also to extend deadlines up to an additional 180 days to finish a projected completion date of retrofit without triggering permanent relocation assistance to tenants in order to implement and satisfy these retrofit mandates. There have been a few amendments since the ordinance was transmitted that are merely technical in nature, or they clarify provisions that were earlier transmitted. Both Building and Safety and the Housing Department submitted those amendments, and I believe council members have a red line copy of that. If not, I can provide that.
I don't have one, I don't think.
There's a red line.
So the changes I mentioned are really technical in nature for building and safety. They provided a less confusing, clearer definition of a single-family dwelling and made some technical revisions to the engineering analysis requirements. As for housing, again, these are technical revisions and simply clarify that RAC does have the authority it needs to make modifications to timelines if needed for owners to meet the retrofit deadlines.
Let's talk about that for a second. I want to be clear with respect to the time frame for completion of this work, and I believe there's language that talks about 2 years to get your permits in, that then the clock starts for 5 years to come into compliance.
So I believe you're referring to the soft story retrofit ordinance timelines. That is correct. Within 2 years after service of an order from the department, an owner must obtain all necessary permits for rehabilitation or demolition. The current ordinance states that they have 4 years from the receipt of that order to complete the retrofit or demolition work, not 5 years.
Right, so we want that to be 5 years.
Okay. And the department does not have any problem with that. That can be done.
Okay.
And for, if you have questions in specific about any of the technical provisions of the ordinance, we do have Frank Bush here from the Department of Building Safety to address that.
She just said that. Okay. So my first question, so my first concern, and I want to be clear, so it's from the point, it doesn't toll, it doesn't begin to, the 5 years don't come into play until?
Service of an order.
Right. Okay. I just want to be clear, just so that we have that on the record. So,
Mr. Chair, on that point,
yes.
so if I could, let's go and read the language. I want to make sure that I'm getting this accurately. So on page 3 of the draft ordinance, the red line version that you handed out,
Yes.
Time limits for compliance. Item 1 there says that within 1 year after service of the order described in this section, submit to the department for review and approval the following items. So I read that within 1 year after service of the order, then you get into section 2 there where it says within 2 years after service of the order. So, so when does the 5 year sort of time actually start? Is it the first year or at the conclusion of a second year?
It would start at the beginning with the initial order for a total of 5 years. So.
Well, no, it would be a total of 7 potentially. So you'd have 1 year of order, and then at the within that year of order, you're presumably supposed to get your permits, which gives you 2 years of getting all of the review that you need, and then after that, you'd have the clock starts on when you remediate the building, and you've got up to 5 years. So if you looked at it from 0 to end, it's a total of 8 years the way I read it. I want to make sure that that's how I'm understanding it.
So I don't know if Frank wants to.
Good afternoon, Frank Bush from Building and Safety. The plan of it is right now, as you mentioned, that there'll be 1 year to submit the plan for review, and then to work on getting the plans and the permits by the second year, and then completing the work we had initially by the 4th year. So a total, but now we're hearing 5, that you'd like 5, so the total would be 5 years. So from start, so the beginning, the first year, you got 1 year, they'll have 1 year to submit to us what the plan is, and then to work on if there are corrections or whatever needs to be done, and then by the second year to have the permit obtained and get the work started.
So by the second year, you get the 2 years, and then you have to be completed 5 years after that.
By the end of the 5th year.
Yeah.
So it's a total of 5 years.
Okay.
5 and 2.
No,
5
it's a
total.
total of 5.
It's a total of 5.
And so I think it raises a couple of challenges. I mean, the department, we want to get this done as soon as possible. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I just, on this point, I think it's really important to understand how much time we actually have and what it is that the departments can actually do. So there's 13,500 or so soft story buildings in a universe that need to be remediated. Will we realistically be able to workflow? I understand it's not all at the same time and it's staggered because well, actually it is all at the same time. You've got 1 year of order, of notice rather, and then you have to get everything put to bed in 2 years to start construction.
Correct.
And then you have
It's from the time that we get, the time the order is issued. And we're going to be putting them in categories to start with. And just to let you know that we already have the staff has been allotted and has been in the budget cycle. It's already there, ready to go. We have the staff that are going to be specifically assigned to doing this, the engineers and the inspectors. So we're all geared up and ready to go on this, the 13,500 roughly.
So you can handle that in 1 year's time?
You're talking about the...
Well, so we're going to put a mandate out, and then folks have got 1 year from that mandate.
From the time that they get the order to come, the notice, and we're going to be breaking that up into different categories, the different types of buildings when we start that. However, people will be able to also come in voluntarily. They can come in before that. They don't have to wait till they get an order from us. But we are going to stagger those into 3 phases so that we can not have them all there at one time.
My suggestion is the way we cure that is that we toll everything, right? Until, let's look from the building owner's perspective. When do I start, right? So you've got your schedule, and Mr. Fuentes has indicated this is a pretty massive endeavor. I'm pleased to hear that you've got the hiring in place. We're going to have to come back and talk about authorizations, et cetera. But from the building owner's perspective, they need a certain period to start. It seems to me that 5 years is the period that they would have after we go through the city stuff for them to come into compliance. And so we want to make sure, City Attorney, that the language reflects what our intention is, and that is that there's a period of time for people to get their permits, for the department to do their work, but that then there's this reason time, 5 years, for the building owners to come into compliance.
So for clarification,
So the result would be 7 years.
The committee is requesting
It could be up to 7 years.
from the point of receiving permits, they have 5 years.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So for a total of 7 years.
Yep.
And you've got effectively 2 years to get your permits and your review and all of that in order, and the notice within that, and then 5 years after that. That's why I wanted to do the math initially, because I could read this as 8, but it sounds like it's 7 is what.
And I think we can get, I think the value of this is that we have a meeting of the minds within both the city and the departments and the tenants, so that then we know that we can come into compliance, that people have reason notice, that there's a set time, and that we're all of accord, to say that.
So to summarize, 7 years total.
Total.
To complete
Correct.
all demolition. For soft story.
And that doesn't preclude your other comments with respect to when, let's say, developers challenge for a specific reason as a hardship, there's some circumstance that they have to come to you at that point. You have already something written into them.
Right.
Right. Yes.
And
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just a question, maybe this is for the city attorney. Could there be a line in this section that says in pretty plain language that from the time you get your notice, you have 7 years total?
5.
5 total?
So we could change.
So because we had trouble doing the math, so I imagine that.
So number 3 instead of 4 could say 7.
Yeah. That's how. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you're the attorney, not me, but that's it. Yeah, that would make sense. After service of the order, that's the beginning to end.
Okay. Any questions?
Any further questions?
Well, so if it's okay with the chair, maybe we can keep going through this red line copy, because I want to get to the occupant and tenant advisory part of that, because conversely, the idea of having such a short window, I think, poses a potential negative impact to tenants, because you have to comply with this order, and we want to make sure that that the advisories all sort of fall into place. So it looks like you've got a revision here on page 6, section 91.9307.2. The new red line there says relocation benefits pursuant to Article 1, Chapter 15. Can you help me? I don't know off the top of my head what does that do? How do we make sure that if there has to be relocation because of the extent of the remediation that the building needs, how are we protecting the tenants?
We have representatives from housing here today, could probably elaborate on that best.
I can just mention one thing. From the very beginning, the first thing we're going to be doing is sending out a courtesy notice to all property owners that we'll have on the list once the ordinance is done. And in that notification package is going to be information that's going to be provided by the Housing Department, Housing Community Investment Department, and that'll have all the requirements they have for the tenant, information on it, relocation, any assistance like that, and then they'll be doing follow-up, and they can speak to that in specifics about how they're going to do that. But we will be notifying them in our mail packet. They're going to provide it to us, so we can make sure everybody knows right off the bat that they're going to have to deal with it.
And so maybe there's somebody here from housing. So if you get to a place where you actually have to, the remediation work is such that you have to move folks, how are we making sure that we're protecting the tenants in these buildings?
Daniel Gomez, Housing and Community Investment. As Mr. Bush stated, we're going to have documents included with their orders that will give the tenants and the owners notice of the requirements under the Tenant Habitability Program. The Tenant Habitability Program is essentially a set of construction safety regulations that apply to tenants, and so they're going to get early notice of that at the same time the owner gives notice of the requirement to do the earthquake work.
And so what would trigger a relocation? I mean, how do we make sure that everybody's honest in this conversation, that that both sides, the tenant and the owner, actually, you don't have one party saying you've got to go and another one saying I want to go? I mean, how do you keep everybody honest in all of this?
Excellent question. The nature of seismic work is defined as primary renovation work, and that brings it within scope of the Tenant Habitability Program. And so to do the seismic work, you need a building permit. And so when you apply for a building permit, you have to submit a plan on how you're going to mitigate the impact to the tenants. And so the term is untenable conditions. So we regulate what the untenable conditions are, the duration, and we assure that the tenants have knowledge of that. So you cannot have untenable conditions, let's say, between 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the daytime. That's temporary water shut-off. But also, in our experience with the voluntary work, the units are not being affected. The work is exterior of the building. However, there's the risk of work damaging the interior of the building. So we need this language to make certain we have the ability to give early notice to the tenants and the owners of the requirements for the tenant habitability plan.
So does the housing department work in conjunction with building and safety to make sure that that untenability aspect is being monitored? Because one of the reasons I'd like to see more time, and thank you to the chair for supporting that idea, is that sometimes the coordination doesn't sort of fit hand in glove sometimes. So is it housing that then would sort of revise the tenantability plan and then make sure that building and safety is enforcing? I mean, how does that work?
We intend to have tenant habitability plan staff review the plan at the permit issuance in conjunction with plan check.
It's a required sign-off before the permit can be issued. They go to the housing department and get the approval done. And if they're, as he mentioned, they'll have to relocate tenants, they'll be specifying that.
And then they let you all know. And then presumably you'll let the owner know of the building.
They'll be letting the owner of the building know what they have to do.
Okay.
Yes.
With their...
I guess the concern is that, for me at least, is that this is going to be a big undertaking, potentially. And you'll have batches of work, and we're going to have to make sure that we don't miss a week or 2 or 3 in just this part of it, because then you get really behind, and before you know it, time starts running out on you.
That's the very reason for including these amendments into the draft ordinance,
Okay.
is we need to be involved at that stage.
Thank you.
On this question,
Go ahead,
Chairman.
Jim.
Quick question. Now, so the relocation benefits that tenants are going to be entitled to pursuant to state law, federal law, what sort of determines, do they get the greater amount, or what kind of range are we talking about if, and I guess a tenant could be displaced for a week or so?
Our municipal code under under LAMC Section 152 is the tenant habitability program. It applies to all construction work, not just seismic. So it's existing law that if you're going to work on a system of a building, you have to have a tenant habitability plan. If the residence becomes impacted, and by definition becomes impacted so that it's untenable, as defined by state law, then it comes into our review process. How are you mitigating the untenable conditions? Are you limiting them? Because construction work is disruptive. There's a certain amount of, let's say, invasion of your lifestyle in the building that one must tolerate if the work's going to get done. So we set standards within the plan to determine the reasonableness. If it's going to be untenable to the extent that's unreasonable or outside of working hours, or there's no hot water for a week, let's say, or no electricity for a week, or even 2 days, well, then the right to temporary relocation assistance comes in, or the right to permanent relocation assistance may come in. It's a matter of managing the job so that the tenants have a lot of entitlements under this, under existing law in our city.
Right.
So could you give us a picture of what the sort of guiding principles around the relocation benefits are? Are they state? Are they federal? Is it only a municipal program?
I believe the foundation for that was under state law.
Okay.
But we enacted them in our municipal code as a charter city, and those sit aside from this program. Any types of violations may entitle a person to relocation benefits. But as we're discussing within the scheme of the seismic retrofit ordinance, what we do is we evaluate the plan. We look at the hours of work, we look at the contractor, we look at the estimated completion date, we take a census of the building, we take the names of all the residents, the amount of the rent that they pay, and we look at the reasonableness of the plan, and then if the plan is unreasonable and does not mitigate the any untenable conditions, then we'll say you must do something, temporary or permanent relocation assistance, because you're opening the entire building, and people can't live without a roof, let's say, or the floor, or water. And again, that's true of any construction site that works on the system of the building. We do this daily.
Right. I'm just trying to get a picture for how this looks for the set of tenants that potentially get affected during this process. So I think, the chair, Mr. Fuentes, just pointed out this is a huge number of buildings. And so, we're at 1.5% vacancy right now.
Right.
So if you, what do you give people to relocate? And is there the material basis for people to locate all at once?
Our desire is to keep people in the buildings. And with respect to the amounts, a single household is something like $9,000 for permanent, and a qualified household is around $18,000 to $19,000 per household. But our interest here in operating the tenant habitability program is not to have tenants move out. We want to mitigate the impact to their life in the building so that they can stay there, and if they're temporarily out, have the right to come back. I've got some handouts here.
So it's your expectation that people actually having to move out of their places for a short time or permanently will be limited under this program?
It will be limited. In our experience with the voluntary retrofit, we've not had the instance where people have had to be permanently relocated. There's been some temporary relocations, like we had one case where it was for 2 hours, just so that they could jack the building because it was a certain condition. We don't anticipate much impact to the residents, but we still need the plan. We still need the review.
Got it.
So what we have here under Exhibit 1, it's the existing tenant habitability plan ordinance. And if you look at the highlighted items 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then C, these clearly state all the entitlements the residents have and all the items we must review in accepting as approved a tenant habitability plan. There are no changes to this under what we're discussing here or in any of the red line documents. It's existing LA law, and it applies to every construction site, not just seismic.
Mr. Gomez? Go ahead.
Certainly. The other document labeled Exhibit 2, this is the definition for primary renovation work. Now, primary renovation work, these are all construction safety orders. Let's view them like that. So if you look at item 4, seismic work fits within this definition under item 4 as being structural work, exposing the frame of the building. So seismic work comes within the scope of this, just as plumbing would or electrical does under this. So seismic is brought in under this regulation, and then the construction safety orders or the mitigating concerns are addressed by this. So we're talking about existing law.
Separate from that, let me ask you, on the voluntary program, do you have enough experience to talk about how this scales up? Right? You gave us like one example, 2 examples. Give us some numbers so that we can get a sense of what this will look like. Right? I don't think 13,500 are going to come in the door the first day. I mean, this is going to play out over a period of time. But what experiences do you have that might indicate what it looks when we start going to scale?
The 15 jobs that I've reviewed did not require relocation, permanent relocation, and they only required temporary, but for less than a day. I can't speak beyond the 15 cases, unfortunately.
And the 15 cases represent the entirety of the volunteer efforts, or
No.
the ones you've handled personally?
Just the ones that have come in my review.
And the numbers, do you have a sense of the numbers who have participated in the voluntary program within the department?
I don't.
Okay.
We have approximately 12 that have come in for voluntary compliance at this time.
So we don't, I mean, the numbers are really small, make it difficult for us to project.
Judge.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So just moving along here on the language, the other area that is not redlined, doesn't look like it's changed, is on page, well, maybe it has changed, on page 12. I thought I had read in a previous draft as it relates to enforcement that there would be a misdemeanor charge if folks didn't participate. Did I read that correctly? Or is that in our sort of current draft?
Do you want me to do it?
Monica Castillo with City Attorney. A misdemeanor, there is an existing code that any violation of the building code is treatable as a misdemeanor.
That would be for non-compliance if somebody absolutely refused to do anything on this, and then the case would be submitted to the city attorney's office. That is ultimately what can happen. It's a warning in there. The notice is that somebody could be charged for a misdemeanor for failing to comply.
Okay.
If somebody absolutely refused to do anything.
And that rings true for all of your building and safety
That's for every
code.
order that we issue.
Got it. And so in the section there, 91.9505.7, enforcement, it also says here that the superintendent could order the demolition of the building for noncompliance. Effective, lots of notice, obviously, but to me that seems like it's exactly what we don't want to do, especially if the building can be remediated.
We don't have intention on doing that. That language is in there in case it needs to be done, and it can be done in, for imminent hazard situations, and we would utilize it along then, like if there was a disaster, we determined a building was unsafe to the public, then it could be demolished.
But that's in your existing capability now.
Yes.
So I don't know that maybe it's just a nuance, but from a public policy perspective, if we're talking about the preservation of housing, I don't know that we should be intimating here that we would be willing to demolish as a result of this particular ordinance. So I would recommend, I mean, if it's already a tool that you have for folks who present, or buildings that present an imminent danger, let's just leave that alone and take this out.
Yes, we can consider deleting that
With the
provision.
chair's permission, of course.
No.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that.
I could not concur more vigorously.
So, I mean, I don't know how you do it, but well, actually, we could probably fashion it now. I mean, the enforcement is you already have it in your capability, so we would just wordsmith that to not speak to demolition.
Yep.
You just delete that last sentence is how you do it, I think.
Right, we could delete that last sentence and reference to the existing authorities.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I do have other questions, but it doesn't relate, I think, anymore to the red line version that we've got here. It's more sort of on the policy in general, so whenever that would be appropriate.
Mr. Price?
Nothing.
Okay. Any other questions on this red line version? Because we're ready to go forward. Get it myself. Are we good? We're good. Thank you. Mr. Fuentes, thank you. Public comment, or you want to get into another?
Well, I wanted to ask a little bit about, with housing, if it's okay, about the financing. So this is the mandate piece. The part that I think that we're all waiting for with bated breath is to understand if the governor is going to sign AB 428, is that the right number, on the tax credit? And also to hear from staff on where we are with getting some assurances that the lending community is going to actually be able to help us do this. And so to me, it's important to have the simultaneous conversation. I know that there's an urge, I think, by some to pass the mandate, but I'd like to hear from somebody about where we are on the financing of all of this. Probably from the housing department is who I would guess should probably be up here. Maybe even the CAO. How's that?
Look, we recognize there's a lot of unknowns, and I'm very comfortable with that. That's okay. We are in a kind of bifurcated process, and I know the CA is thinking about Brown Act, appropriately so, but I don't think we're precluded from having a conversation about the policy aspects of the financing.
Discussion would be appropriate. It does relate to the subject matter.
Okay. Good.
I'm Laura Guglielmo with the Housing and Community Investment Department in Anna Ortega, with the same department. We've previously reported on options for you on how to finance this, and it's my understanding that remains with the council at this point. So I'm not sure. We're having to answer questions, but I'm not really sure what more you're looking at this point.
So let me try. So when we were here last, we had a conversation about, like San Francisco did, to go to the private lending sort of world, the equity world, to understand how it is that we're going to finance all of this. And when we were here last on this issue, we also had a conversation of potentially having the PACE providers, the folks who are helping do retrofitting, efficiency type work, having them potentially be a resource to those small property owners who don't have the means to maybe get conventional lending. I'm reticent to want to move on a mandate unless I understand a little bit more on what progress you all have made with the lending community. When we were here last, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, you all were going to continue, CAO, I think largely, we're going to continue conversations with the financial industry to understand what would be available out there. My sense is, and was that day, I think I said this, is that if there's a mandate, then the lending world will probably come along because they'll know that there's going to be a way to recover the costs of these mitigations. But I wanted to see if there's been any update on sort of how that's going, number one, and number two, to understand if there's any preclusion in state law or a need for state law to clarify whether PACE providers could be the sort of contractors, I'll use the term of last resort, for those folks who can't get conventional financing to secure the mandate that we're potentially going to pass.
On your first question, it was our understanding that the CAO was going to lead that, and we have not had an update from them on that, but I'm not sure if anyone can speak.
Anybody here from the CAO?
That, but we haven't had that conversation.
My understanding is that the CAO is holding for us to move this.
I think that's the understanding as well, with the belief that this will encourage the governor to sign the law that would and get the wheels in motion.
Governor Brown?
Yes.
Yeah, that's not likely. I mean, the idea that this ordinance is going to make the governor of the state of California sign off on legislation, I don't think that's how the state wags. But I do think, though, that we would be, I think, better equipped if we have at least some update with the financial institutions in the city to understand, what it is that they would like to see to feel good about a mandate. Moving the mandate, I think, is important, but I don't know that for something as important as this that we can just say mission accomplished if we just pass the ordinance. I really would like to get a sense for where we are with the financial institutions. And again, that's number one. Number two, if we can't, I'd like to know if the PACE programs would allow for this type of retrofitting so that we at least know that there is a way for folks to avail themselves of contractors and mitigations.
The PACE program is a program that's being used in San Francisco for their retrofit program, so we do expect that it would be applicable here in Los Angeles. Remember, that was a separate report last time, but everything is moving along, and they added additional providers into our PACE program.
Yep.
But there's absolutely, it should be able to be used because that is, in fact, one of the options that San Francisco is using to have a mechanism, kind of a last resort mechanism for funding.
San Francisco is a special place. I want to make sure that with 100% certainty that I can tell an owner of a building, there is no excuse. You can finance this even if it's through PACE. I can say that with 100% assuredness?
I do believe you can, but that report lead is the CAO. But from everything we've seen, yes.
Okay.
So we apologize, but we really weren't prepared for this discussion on the finance aspect of this today, with the understanding that was the CAO's, the CAO would take that lead on that aspect.
No.
So we're trying to be as responsive as we can.
Sure, no, and I appreciate it. For me, in order to feel good about passing a mandate, I want to be able to also know that there is a way for this to actually be realized. And even just a hint that it would be realized would make me feel much better about supporting something today. Because otherwise, I can wait till another committee meeting.
Okay. We will ask the CAO to be there with us Friday when we address this.
In committee?
No, in council.
Oh, this is going to council on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
You could discuss it in council, and if you were not comfortable, you could refer it back to committee.
We will take this and ensure that the CAO comes to report on council. I'm comfortable with this. I'm comfortable with the conversation because we have a need for a mandate and direction because the volunteer program, you heard the examples, simply do not respond to the responsibility that we have and given the report, et cetera, where we're at. Mr. Fuentes and I did spend some time in Sacramento, and I wouldn't suggest that L.A. necessarily is the dog that wags the tail, but there is a responsibility that we have to move this forward it does not help us not to have a program in place and then ask Sacramento to be generous with resources for a program that doesn't exist. And so clearly, while it may not be causal, I do believe it is sequential. And so we should probably move forward with that. I appreciate your efforts to be as responsive as you could be, but I think both of us are confident that you are as responsive as you could be. I will ask the CAO to be there Friday for the report.
Thank you.
Okay. Are we ready for public comment?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Public comment. I've got Mr. Aguilar, Beverly Kenworthy. I'm sorry, Carlos Aguilar, Beverly Kenworthy, and Cheryl Turner. Hey. Sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Carlos Aguilar, Coalition for Economic Survival. We're concerned with moving the earthquake retrofit mandate without resolving the cost pass-through issue. The chair of the committee and others have pledged there'd be no 100% pass-through to tenants. But if this mandate takes effect without resolving the pass-through issues, tenants could pay the entire retrofit cost and face up to $75 monthly rent increase. An increase like that will no doubt result in massive displacement. We support making the units safe, but not on the back of the tenants. And we urge that the earthquake retrofit mandate be approved together with amending to the existing cost pass-through provision. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Beverly Kenworthy with the California Apartment Association. First, I'd like to thank the members of the committee for addressing our major concerns here in this proposed ordinance. I just wanted to see if I can make a clarification. We appreciate the 7 years. That's really terrific. I'm a little bit concerned about with item number 1, the 1 year after service of the order and the structural analysis. That might be a short time period. That is going to require some outlay of, that's going to require maybe some financing. They're going to have to put out some capital for that. And I'm wondering, you know, I'd like 2 years, but maybe 18 months. Can we get 18 months? If that's still part of this discussion, since we moved it to 7 years, I'm just not clear what's happening with that 1 year time frame after the service order. So I think if we could extend that a little bit, or if everything's just getting rolled into that 7 years, then I guess my concerns are not valid. So I just wasn't clear on how we work that out. We appreciate the striking of the demolition language.
Yes.
And ideally, we would like the pass-through and this whole package, and we realize that there comes some constraints against that. So we look forward to continue working on the pass-through issue.
Okay. Thank you.
My name is Cheryl Turner, and I'm here in my individual capacity as a small property owner. First of all, I'd like to say I do support the mayor and the council's committee's effort to encourage seismic earthquake safety in the city of Los Angeles. Encourage it not only for multifamily owners of property, but also for single-family homes. But I would like to talk about this ordinance and how it's being implemented. First of all, I'm concerned about the recordation issue of the order. This ordinance already requires that notice be given to tenants and all occupants, and maybe if you added a provision to potential purchasers of the property, yes. But putting that kind of notice with the county recorder may affect the property owner's ability to obtain financing and possibly insurance. It would be like a red flag amounting to almost like, well, foreclosure is being threatened against you. Also, I was concerned about the criminal prosecution element, which I believe is being addressed. If you have the power to vacate the units and possibly demolish it, then why do you need to prosecute? Thank you.
Okay, good points. Thank you. Mr. Clark, Jim Clark, Norton Townsley. And Thelmy Pettis, and Jonathan Ayon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, I want to reiterate what my colleague Beverly Kenworthy said. Thank you. We appreciate the extension. I just want to be clear. I have a question. I want to make sure that the city attorney knows that in those sections that we would have 2 years to do the structural analysis, the tenant habitability plan, and submit the plans to the departments, and then up to 3 years to get the permits, and then 7 years to finish from the outset of the service of the order. That's what I want to be clarify, because I think that's what we have all been talking about, and I got some nodding heads, but I just wanted to make sure that that's what we're looking at, because Beverly mentioned a year. I want to make sure that it's 2.
City Attorney?
I'm going to run out of time.
No.
Sorry.
Hold the time.
Monica Castillo with City Attorney. That is a correct characterization of what the changes would be. Yeah.
Okay, and I'll get with you.
Go ahead. Can we hold down a little bit in the audience?
And I should probably start by saying I'm Jim Clark with the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. But again, thank you for that adjustment of the time frame, and also for removing the language of demolition. I think both sides agree with that. We don't want to see these buildings destroyed. We're doing this to save them and continue to protect the housing stock.
That's why we're here. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Telmi Perez. I'm with the LA Human Right to Housing Collective, also Renters Day Los Angeles Coalition. We do continue to agree with the intent of this ordinance and are happy that there will be more safety in the city when the big one comes. We do want to encourage you that we are keeping an eye on making sure that we're moving forward with a financing program that does not include a pass-through to tenants. We don't think that this should be, that this ordinance should fall on the back of tenants, and that this kind of work should. As we know, 13,000 people a month in the county are already facing homelessness. We have a large homeless crisis here in Los Angeles, so we want to make sure that that does not happen. We also have serious concerns with the language in the ordinance. One, we're glad that you removed the demolition language. That's a positive step forward. But in the enforcement section, there is language around sanctions for including evicting or vacating an entire building if a landlord does not comply. This could be seen as incentive, especially in gentrifying communities, and we want to make sure that you pay attention to this and remove the language around vacating buildings.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Ayon, here with
Jonathan, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Renters Day Coalition. Tenants in Illinois already have the most unaffordable rates in the country. I agree with the necessity to keep all these housing conditions safe. This is a vital and priority in this state, as we expect in the big one. However, the 100% pass-through, as Thelmy was saying, in the state is really increasing the burden of the tenants, as the program reads. Throughout my community organizing experience at Thai Community Development Center in East Hollywood, I have continuously worked with residents that have shared with me their increasing concerns with eviction and displacement. Please consider putting together a new program that protects tenants and alleviates the already severe affordable housing crisis in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me say this. There's I don't disagree with you. But there's another component to this. So we're in this one committee, in this silo, but we need to build more housing. And the same group of people that's here are going to need to be with us in our efforts to build more housing and make it easier to build housing in the city of Los Angeles, because that is part of the impossibility that exists, is that we're unable to build sufficient housing. We got to come up with 100,000 units, 50,000 have to be affordable, low income, and for the homeless. And the same coalition that's here needs to be engaged in that same discussion as we move forward reforms to make it easier to build, because that's the only thing that will help us bring these prices down. It's the most expensive city. You know the speech. Thank you. I have Billy Lay. Vic Virek. And Wayne Hausman. Mr. Lay? You're Mr. Lay? You're
Billy.
Miss-
Billy. Wayne.
Who are you, sir?
Victor Varick.
Victor Varick. Wayne. And Mr. Lane? Correct. Thank you. Mr. Lay?
My name is Billy Lay from the Renters Day Coalition, also from Hcid. I appreciate Council Fuentes bringing up the protection part for tenants. And then I just want to point out echo what Carlos and Telmi had mentioned about abuse too, the gentrification and protection for those. So I'm encouraging for transparency in the process, because most likely landlord can just say, oh, this unit is not habitable, you move out, and then Costa-Hawkins comes and then displacement happen. So transparency for tenants and also in the process. That's all.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can someone answer, are we using the REAP mechanism for with this? Anybody? As one of the enforcement mechanisms?
Yes, please, the housing, please.
And do you get to that before you get to vacation or demolition or essentially eliminating units?
Under current law, as REAP is written, it's a remedy after noncompliance with an order. So
right.
It's not an upfront enforcement tool. You can look at it as a threat. It's not an active mechanism in this seismic ordinance. It's at the option of the enforcement entity whether they want to refer it into the rent escrow account program.
Right, so that's my question. Before you destroy a unit, is the intention to use that mechanism for noncompliance?
I can't speak to that other than to say that the fire department, the building department, and the police department, and the housing department all have enforcement authority. And anytime they enforce on a residential rental property that's within the scope of REAP, they can refer it to REAP. So it's that we administer REAP, but other entities make referrals to us, even the county health department.
So, Councilmember, I think it's for us to determine that that's not, demolition is not an option. One, not an option, right? It exists, but that all these have to take place and be available to us before we get to that final step.
Right. Well, okay. I mean, it just seems like we have a remedy for the question that's being raised, but it's not mentioned. I mean, I didn't see it mentioned as a...
It exists regardless.
Yeah, right. Oh, I understand that, but, I mean, the right to demolish exists regardless, too, but you put it there.
Well, that would be for the building department to discuss. We'll administer REAP when anyone makes a referral to us, when any enforcement group does. So it's available when there's noncompliance with an order. We might be looking at after 7 years.
Okay. Thank you.
That was Daniel Gomez, HCID.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gomez.
Drop the mic.
Mr. Hausman? Wayne Hausman?
Yeah, we have to share the microphones. Looks like somebody stole one again. So we had a fiscal impact statement. I tried to read it. The word no is after it. I think that means none submitted. And then a community impact statement. Again, none submitted. Wow, you guys are really doing a good job on this one, huh? You're ramming this through too fast, and you need to Google a term called a regulatory taking. When you take a zoned property and make it an instant overnight violation, you are causing a regulatory taking. And I hope and I pray to God that somebody does a class action lawsuit so the city will pay for all these seismic retrofits and the tenants will pay nothing for it and the landlords will pay nothing for it. Why don't you guys, you got $6.4 billion sitting in that one savings account. Why don't you pay the landlords to do this and fix it? And that would be a good deal.
Vic, Barrick?
Thank you. I'm Vic Varick. I'm an apartment owner. And there are two basic parts to this problem on the retrofit. One is timing. We don't know if the big earthquake's going to be today or 20 years from now. We need to get it done. And for those owners who are really concerned about the safety of the tenants and also the housing that the tenants would be able to continue to have, they need to be able to get inspections done promptly and plan and get the work done promptly. The financing of it is another thing. It's a matter of being able to pay for that work. And it's a matter of when somebody owns a property, there's a certain amount of cash flow. And if you don't have enough cash flow, the lenders aren't going to pay you not pay you, but they're not going to pay for getting the work done. You need to get that done. And also, if you have, if you can get pass-throughs from the tenants, that's great. And just one quick part on there. If you ask for too much from the tenant, it's not going to be worth it because it's past the market. You don't want to lose your tenants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Martha Cox. Easy for you to say.
I know. Of course.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. This is Martha Cox Nidickman. I represent the Building Owners and Managers Association, and I'm addressing my remarks today specifically to the concrete buildings. Today is really only a beginning. It's not an ending, but a beginning, assuming this is passed on, in a process considering how to mitigate the impact on apartment and commercial building owners. The Mayor's Office is reviewing several of BOMA's recommendations, including limiting the triggering of building code upgrades, waiving permit fees, and creating an expedited permit process for retrofit construction. Today, BOMA also urges the Council to consider two other recommendations. First, to waive the gross receipts tax for a short period of time for businesses that agree to move back into vacated retrofitted buildings. And second, to allow the retention of non-conforming rights to owners who choose to demolish and rebuild their commercial building. We will be putting our recommendations in writing, and we look forward to working with Council on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that meets our public comment.
Mr. Chair, there was just, for the city attorney's benefit, I wanted to make sure that we didn't miss on page 5, section 91.9306.6, recordation. It also references demolition there too. So separate from the enforcement, maybe there's a way for us to just end the paragraph there where it says within the scope of this division, period. I'm sorry, altered period.
Why don't we just scrub demolition out of every... Yes. So can we scrub those out?
Vacate and demolition.
Mm-hmm. Good with it? Good. All right. Thank you. You heard what I said at the beginning. I'm ready to approve the ordinance as amended and move this to council. Can you get a second?
Second.
I got a motion and a second. Need a roll call?
Ready for roll call?
I'm ready for roll call.
Cedillo.
Cedillo, aye.
Fuentes.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Harris Dawson.
Aye.
4 ayes.
Good. Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chair, items 2 through 5 are regarding the Ellis Act. Would you like to take those items together?
Sure.
Items 2 through 5 involve a motion, Carretzo-Farrell, and a budget recommendation regarding the Ellis Act. And there's also a motion, Cedillo-Bonin.
Take that. Okay. Can we get Housing Department to the table? Identify yourself for the record.
Good afternoon, Councilman Ana Ortega, Director of Rent Stabilization with the Housing and Community Investment Department.
Thank you. You want to talk to us about Ellis, what you've got for the last 5 years?
I thought I could begin by giving a brief background on Ellis, which is, of course, a state law that grants property owners the right to exit from the rental housing market, and was a direct response to a case in the city of Santa Monica called Nash versus City of Santa Monica, a 1984 case in which Mr. Nash challenged Santa Monica's ordinance, which did not allow him to demolish his property since he didn't satisfy the permit criteria in that city. This was adopted, so the Ellis Act was adopted statewide in 1985. The City of Los Angeles didn't adopt our own Ellis amendments until 2006, more than 20 years later. But we did adopt Ellis provisions in 2006 and then additional provisions in 2007 that strengthened primarily, they incorporated the state Ellis provisions into the Los Angeles Rent Stabilization Ordinance. And then in 2007, we strengthened the tenant relocation provisions. So basically, those requirements that were adopted and incorporated into the Los Angeles Rent Stabilization Ordinance, again, we can't prevent landlords from going out of the rental housing business, but there are certain protections provided to tenants, such as they're entitled to a minimum notification of 120 days, and the 120 days can be extended for up to a year for more vulnerable tenants, seniors, families with children and seniors and the disabled are entitled to up to 1 year. They're also entitled to relocation assistance, and in 2006 and 2007, we strengthened the city's relocation provisions and brought into the process a tenant relocation services provider to assist with doing that. Since they were brought on in their initial contract in 2007, we have provided assisted in providing over $40 million in tenant relocation services to the city's tenants, not just for Ellis, but tenants evicted for no-fault reasons. If the landlord uses the Ellis provisions to get out of the rental housing market, there are certain rights that the tenants have within 2 years and within 5 years of the withdrawal. Within 2 years, they can the landlord is liable to the tenants for actual and exemplary damages, and the city may institute civil proceedings. Within 5 years, if they put it back, the tenants have the first right of refusal, and the units, if they're put back, they have to be at the rent at which they were removed plus allowable rent increases. We have passed out a chart that has a trend of Ellis removals, kind of a summary from 2001 to 2015. If you take a look at that, you'll see that the peak of the Ellis activity was in 2005 and 6.
Wow.
And then, of course, as I mentioned, the city adopted our own provisions in 2006 and 7. So the activity went way, way down starting in 2007 and 8. It wasn't necessarily just the Ellis provisions that the city adopted, but of course this was when the economy was going down and the housing market was going into a crisis. So it went from a high of like 10,000 units in the years between 2005 and 6 down to 90 units at the lowest point in 2009. So you can see that the trend here on the chart, the orange line is buildings and the blue bars are units. So you can see that the lowest point was in 2009 with 14 buildings and 90 units, and then it started to go up and up a little bit as the economy has recovered. So now we're that last bar for 2015 is only for half a year. It's through June 30th. But you can see that the activity is going up. We're nowhere near the record levels we had at the peak, but it is trending up. It tripled between 2013 and 2014, and I can tell you that in 2015, we're about at the same pace as in 2014, maybe a little bit more. On the back of that page, you can see it broken down by council district, and this is definitely a phenomena that's taking place in particular parts of the city. You know, generally areas that are gentrifying, popular areas. There's a lot in CD5. There's a lot in CD11.
It's 5.
Coretz, Hollywood.
And 11 is?
Venice. There's quite a bit of this activity in the Venice area. Hollywood, Silver Lake. Hold on. Westwood, West LA, North Hollywood, Koreatown, Silver Lake, Atwater, Los Feliz, certain parts of the valley like Sherman Oaks and Studio City, even Boyle Heights and Highland Park and Echo Park have some increased activity, especially along the metro lines. So at this point, the trend is going up. We've seen over the years that we've charted this, we've lost about 3% of the city's rent-stabilized stock, but that's since 2001. It actually averages out to 0.2% a year. But still, it's significant and it's increasing. What we're seeing as a result is more density. There's, when we look at what happened at the various properties that have been Ellis'd, sometimes you see lot combinations happening, and so you're seeing a doubling and tripling of the ultimate number of units that wind up getting built there.
So we're not necessarily losing housing units.
In the end, well, we're losing RSO units.
RSO units.
Yes, but in the end, the trend seems to be that more housing is getting built in these places. Now, part of the changes that were adopted by the city in 2007, though, say that if they remove properties through the Ellis process and then build there on the same property, those new units are now subject to the rent stabilization ordinance. So where before everything we had that was in rent stabilized was pre-78. Now this is one arena in which we have new construction that's also subject to the RSO. They can get that's if they Ellis and then they re-rent there within 5 years. They can get an exemption if they build affordable housing. So this chart...
Placement, is it unit for unit?
No. That's one of the things that we're going to bring in our proposal to strengthen, but if they do not get an exemption for affordable housing and they re-offer for rent within 5 years, everything they build there is subject to the RSO. So they can demolish 10 and build 100. 100 would be subject to the RSO if it happens within 5 years. And they don't get an affordable housing exemption.
Got it.
So the trend is up. It's an important issue that's received a lot of attention. It just so happened that when the city adopted our provisions, the activity was low. As it's increased in recent years, we've been able to see what some of the problems are and identify maybe places where we can strengthen the ordinance. So as you know, there's a number of motions and some instructions in conjunction with our budget that are asking us to look at some of the provisions and how it's working and report back to you. So we are working on that. But there's a number of fixes that we can recommend. Some of them are administrative things that we can do without any change to the ordinance or anything like that. One of them you should be able to see very soon. We were asked to put all of the Ellis units on ZEMAS so that the public can view them and find out about them. That has been transmitted to the planning department, and it should be, if it's not already up, it should be up very soon. There's other things that we're looking at as we work with properties that obtain density bonus, and there's definitely been improvement in our own internal systems in the housing department. We implemented a new rent system in July of 2014, so now we have better data. We're looking at coordinating better, and we're doing good work with our density bonus staff, because a lot of times property owners that are using this provision are also applying for density bonuses, so we keep each other informed about what's going on, and they're very helpful to us in making sure that those property owners know that they're subject to the RSO unless they obtain an exemption. So there's a number of administrative things that we can do to make things better. There's a number of recommendations that will be coming forward with potential amendments to the RSO to improve it. There's things that we would need to work with planning and building and safety, other things that are entirely within the capacity of the housing department. And then lastly, we will like to return to you with recommendations for improvements and amendments at the state level that are beyond the ability of the city to do simply because of the provisions in the existing state law. So that's kind of a preview of the report back that we would like to provide to you in the near future.
Thank you very much. Sir, any questions? Ms. Price? Let's hear from public comment then. That should motivate us. Mr. Bickhart, Mr. Aguilar, Carlos Aguilar, Jim Bickhart, and Becky Dennison.
Jim Bickhart, consultant to Councilmember Koretz. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. We submitted a letter yesterday to all the members of the committee outlining 5 ideas that we would encourage the committee to instruct housing and community investment to include in their review for the report that Ms. Ortega just described to you. We think that they dovetail nicely with the kinds of issues she's talking about. For the public record, they deal with notification issues. They deal with the timing of when somebody can be evicted, when the basically that kind of stuff. And then there are a couple of ideas that may require state legislation, and that would also dovetail with what housing is already talking about. So we encourage you to, on item 2, to send the motion and our additional recommendations to housing for the report. On item 5, actually that's item 5. Item 2, it goes to several departments, housing, building and safety, planning, and we encourage you to send that motion to them for report backs at the earliest possible time. And we also support the thrust of item 4, which was introduced by Councilmember Cedillo. Thank you.
Carlos Aguilar, Coalition for Economic Survival. We all understand that the Ellis Act is a key obstacle to addressing our affordable housing crisis. If we don't preserve what we have, our housing policies are going to fail. Ellis handcuffs our local government, and it's responsible for 20,000 affordable rent-controlled units that have been destroyed already. This law can't continue as is. Some of these motions deal with the Ellis process. There are many loopholes that need to be closed, and we support the motions that address those loopholes. But those loopholes in themselves do not address the RSO units that will still be lost. We need to take bold action now to try to save those units and try to save those tenants that are in those units. Ellis doesn't restrict the city's land use power. It's those powers that can and must be used to dissuade Ellis actions. The Carezzo-Farrell motion looks to do that by exploring a cap on demolitions, expanding the concept of AB 2222, and amending the small lot subdivision ordinance. We fully support this. And in addition, we want to make sure that the city understands that they can mount a full court pressure on state elected officials and pressure them to take action to get rid of this devastating law. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Becky Dennison with the Los Angeles Community Action Network and the Renters Day Coalition. I do want to say that we absolutely support production. It's part of our platform, but we have to preserve what we have now, and it's much a cheaper way to go about addressing the housing crisis in the immediate, and these motions could move us very far forward in strong preservation, and we hope that the report back will provide recommendations as strong as possible under state law. We've presented our full platform to most of your staff. I just want to highlight a couple of things. First of all, we're hoping that you can direct today that any report back around demolition limitations also include conversions. Otherwise, we incentivize conversion over demolition if they're not both regulated. So at least in the report back, it should include both. And also, I'm hoping that the Housing Department will clarify what they just said about getting more units. If we get more units under the Ellis Act, they should be for sale units because people are going out of the rental market, which is a completely different, obviously, group of people being served. And if we get more rental units, it's because people fraudulently used the Ellis Act and we lost the affordability.
Right.
So I hope they'll clarify that and you'll regulate that as well.
I heard you say, you want to come back? Just verify whether or not I heard you say that one of the proposals would be that when 10 units are lost, but if somebody built 100 units, that they would be all maintained in the RSO.
The law currently requires that if they Ellis and then rebuild and offer for rent on the same property within 5 years, 100% of those units are subject to the RSO. The problem, I think, is that they're under the RSO, but they get decontrolled, so the rent is reset. So it's not necessarily at the rents of the tenants who were evicted.
Got it.
Unless they build affordable units, and then they're required to be held at various criteria for affordability.
Okay. I think there's a fix someplace in there. Margaret Malloy, Stephen Luffman, and Mark Simon. Margaret Malloy coming in from outside? Okay, hold a second. No, hold on. Gentlemen?
Sorry.
Hi, Margaret. You're first up. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about the applicability of the Ellis Act as it applied in Venice to almost 800 units of affordable housing that constituted, what was it called? Lincoln Place Apartments.
Mm-hmm.
So tenants were subjected to protecting themselves theoretically under the Ellis Act. When does the city protect people? Why is it the tenant's responsibility to hold the city accountable, and it's kind of impossible to do, and they lost? So those tenants, almost 800 people in very functional community garden apartments, were forced to fight and organize and meet and meet and meet and meet and meet, and they lost. And AMCO was allowed to take units off the market for so many years and to harass people that eventually AMCO put them back on the market at total market rate. 800 units in one blow. The city needs to protect us. We are the residents. We give value to the city. We create neighborhoods and community. When does the city protect the residents? What's the point of the Ellis Act? What's the point of the Mello Act? Here I have Air Venice, 55 units taken off the market. That was all Section 8 and senior housing. It's now illegal Airbnb.
Thank you, Margaret.
But I can just tell you, sir, I have so many multiple units.
Okay. Please leave that with us. Thank you.
Somebody's not doing their job of protecting us.
Stephen Luftman.
Hi, my name is Stephen Luftman. I'm a board member of Mid-City West Community Council, though I'm not representing them today. At the end of November last year, my home of 18 years was bought by a developer of luxury small lot subdivisions. In February, I was Ellis along with 17 other families. The developer's plan was to tear down our affordable apartments and build 19 multi-million-dollar townhouses. The rent stabilization ordinance works. My neighborhood and my neighbors and I have are contributors and residents of our neighborhood for over 20 years. The Ellis Act is tearing apart neighborhoods and families in the name of profiteering. For over 30 years now, rent-stabilized laws have been eaten away in the name of encouraging builders building non-regulated housing. For over 30 years, this trickle-down theory of housing has not worked. Renters are over 50% of the population of Los Angeles. It is time to stop treating us as second-class citizens of this city.
Mark Simon.
Hi, Mark Simon. I'm being Ellis evicted from my home of 23 years on Rodney Drive in Los Feliz. The city tells me I must leave on January 7th. An official at the city housing department tells the press, quote, "We take the landlord at their word that they are going out of the rental business," unquote. Our landlord has filed no applications and received no permits to demolish, to convert to condos, or change the use of this building, our home. Our landlord is not going out of the rental business. He is gaming the system. Within 3 weeks of a tenant's 120 days being over, the landlord re-tenanted that apartment with a graphic designer who works for the landlord's real estate firm. Is that going out of the rental business? That new tenant stated to a tenant of 21 years that he is renting the apartment. If the city rigorously supports landlords in evicting me from my home, why does the city not with even greater rigor support tenants in making sure that those same laws are not being broken or abused? 3 housing officials have told me that the burden of proving a landlord's bad faith rests solely with the tenant. How is this possibly fair? I have other evidence of our landlord's typical bad faith. We must have strict investigation and enforcement of its Ellis eviction laws now by a city agency, and I volunteer
Mr. Simon.
65 Rodney Drive as a test case. Thank you.
Walt Senderfield. J.P. Lavin. And Billy Lay. Billy Lay, leave the room. Is Billy in the overflow? Yeah, okay. Let's wait for him to sit down. Mr. Centerfield.
Yes, thank you. The clock's ticking, not just this clock, but I'm in Rodney Drive. In 99 days, we're going to be evicted. My home of 8 years, Mark's of 23 years, our community with which we have built a way to survive and contribute to our community is being decimated and thrown to the winds. We have every reason to believe our landlord is not acting in good faith, and that's one thing that was not highlighted as much as it could be, that a lot of landlords act in bad faith and to evade and to game this system. The city says there's nothing they can do in advance. We're going to be scattered to the winds, and then it's up to us because we don't have the tools and they don't have the tools. Give us the tools. These motions and more. Furthermore, we've discovered that this fits into a whole larger pattern that's contributing to the crisis in losing affordable housing far faster than it's being created. So we call on you to consider declaring a state of emergency in affordable housing and declaring a moratorium on all evictions that cause the dislocation or loss of affordable housing until we can get the state law amended, until you can carefully consider how to conform city ordinance to the maximum possible strength, and until we can solve the problem you rightly posed is how can we rapidly enforce more. Pass a moratorium on any more dislocations and evictions until we come up with a solution.
Thank you, Walter. JP?
Yes, I live at 2041 North Commonwealth Avenue, the Cove Apartments. We're one of the people that was representing the Los Feliz Neighborhood Council's motion for this. I want to talk specifically about the abuses of the Ellis Act. We had a post put on our door that many people in our building who English as a second language thought was an eviction notice. It says the Cove will be undergoing a condo conversion within the next 90 days. Due to the scope of the work that we've done, we will be vacating, relocating the entire building. There was a monetary fee that we paid to you to help you with moving expenses. Please contact the person that is our so-and-so on-site manager. The company that does this we thought were the owners. We just found out they're not the owners. They're the hired guns by the owners. What's happening is outside money from LA is coming in and it's dismantling all the people that have been living here for years. All these neighborhoods are being destroyed. Lives are being destroyed. And I'm saying, wake up, people, all right? This is our opportunity to stop people from lives being destroyed. And it's happening to me. And by the way, my last note is I'll say this because I know I'm fired up. I get emotional about this. I'm a professional writer. I just sold a TV show yesterday to CBS. Okay, if it can happen to me, I'm going to be fine. But we have senior citizens who are living in our building. We have an old couple who the gentleman is senile. They're not going to have anywhere to live. This is the last. The homelessness for many people. It's time to put it to the end right now.
Thank you.
That's all I have to say.
My name is Billy Lay from Hcid, representing Renters Day and also Tenants Union. Just general comment. In addressing the supply and demand of housing, supply demand or market rate does not regulate housing. Infrastructure, neighbors, neighborhood, people like Walt, people like JP, they build the neighborhood. Closer access to transit, walkability, access to work and school. They build neighborhood. They create demand. And rent stabilization ordinance, as we know, stabilize those community. So I don't think focusing on building housing and then, Ellis Act replacing the housing will solve the housing crisis, because it doesn't. Zoning law need to be changed, planning need to be reconstructed, because we have only 60 years old of coding and planning use. So I recommend for that planning to be seen and change.
Thank you. Vic Varick, Terry Navarro, and Judy Branfman? Judy... Dr. Judy... No,
Branfman.
Judy?
Branfman.
Branfman? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Vic?
Okay, mine was on item 2, having to do with just preservation of affordable housing. And if owners can't get the work done to, I can't afford to get the work done to have renovations done to their properties for the same tenant, then these properties are going to dissipate and become properties that are then going to have to be destroyed and be rebuilt. We need to have property preserved, and the way the capital improvement program is that you can only get no more than half the money out of it that you spent to get the work done, really prevents a lot of property from being improved. Naturally, you're not going to raise the rents more than what the market is, because then you lose your tenants. Okay.
Thank you, Vic. Terry Navarro.
Okay, I am with the Los Angeles Tenants Union. My name is Terry Navarro, and I live in Boyle Heights. Myself and 50 other tenants are being displaced.
Take your time.
From our homes by a developer. Though Ellis is not being used to evict us, there are mass evictions happening across the city, and I'm one of many tenants suffering from it. Stop the mass evictions. Do something to protect tenants from Ellis. Help us not be permanently displaced. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Judy.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I'm Judy Branfman. I was eldest out of Venice apartment in 2004 after 12 years, and my grandparents living there 40 years. Oh, Terry, I spent this morning crying thinking about this whole thing. The personal part was horrible, but what was even worse was and I hate to say it, the absolute complicity of the city departments, the council offices, the city attorney, and the housing department in what turned out to be just a total nightmare. From just the most basic thing of sending our notices to wrong addresses so we'd never get them, to showing up at a hearing I was told I didn't need to come to because the developer wouldn't be there. In the end, 3 years later, when the new owner was illegally re-renting and I took him to court, somehow they'd found the files they told me were lost, and it sent a letter with the owner saying that I had not shown up at that hearing. I mean, this is just the beginning. The eviction wasn't even posted on the housing department's website for 40 days, so I really didn't know if it was really filed or not. You know, this could go on and on. And when I talked to Ms. Ortega the other day, she said the files are only kept back to 2006. They have numbers to 2001. If that's true, during the worst part of Ellis evictions in the city, all our files were destroyed, and we'll never know what really happened. You know, if this is true, it's unbelievable. I want to make one suggestion. I mean, it's totally minimal compared to the really good ones that have been submitted by the housing activists, but that just like we can get emails on planning applications, anybody can get that stuff in the city, that you should immediately notify anyone who's interested parties in any Ellis applications, so that we can do the work you are not doing. More easily. We can try.
Thank you, Judy. Lydia Ponce.
Good afternoon, Lydia Ponce, Venice Beach. I am here before you to say that after a year and a half of making sure that the city and the state of California, California Coastal Commission actually have some kind of conversation between two parents splitting whether we can have a cookie or not have a cookie. The City of Angels and all the mayors previous to this one, including this one, if they really wanted to do something about affordable housing, it would have been done. Because all of this bamboozling and finagling with laws and rules that don't exist are not simply being enforced by the city attorney as he is supporting a process that is completely illegal. If you want to look to the proof, look to the California Coastal Commission May, June, July, and August recordings, and look to the West LA planning findings, because it seems and it appears that too much of the responsibility lies on the community, as opposed to people being paid 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, with benefits and everything that comes along with the bells and whistles of sick days. To say that we're doing the job for all of you is just, that's minimal. We are beyond the capacity to try to keep current and to try to keep everybody else that work for us in the city to do their job.
Thank you, Lydia.
Please.
Sylvie Shane.
Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Sylvie Shane. I live at the Villa Carlotta. We're being evicted under the Ellis. I wanted to make a point that we talk about the Ellis and the number of units that we lose, but in fact, what happens is that constructive eviction happens before an Ellis ever comes into play. We were down to 42% occupancy before we were Ellis, so all those units are not even accounted for. Secondly, I really want to highlight that the city has land use power, and in that there should be some sort of resolution that all land use decisions should be made prior to an Ellis. Effectively, that would require an identification of the impact to both the community that lives in the property, but also it would mitigate the risk to the landlords who currently, there are landlords who have evicted their tenants under Ellis who now have empty buildings. All those people have been displaced, and those property owners can't do what they wanted to do with those properties, and they're losing rents for sometimes upwards to a year. Thank you.
Steve Luffman, Wayne. And Matthew Millen. Mr. Luffman.
Hello, again, my name is Stephen Luftman. The city is obviously in a crisis. People are losing their homes daily. I'm asking right now to immediately have an emergency ICO to stop the destruction of affordable rent-stabilized housing.
Well,
Thank you.
yeah.
Wayne?
Boy, thanks for the whole 1 minute. Well, I don't know what I'm going to do with so much time.
Focus.
Well, you're just you're absolutely hostile, rude, and inconsiderate towards the public. You're paid off and bought off. You only represent developers and property owners. You never represent tenants or anybody else. And the rest of the people are just food to be consumed by your political machine. And that's what this is all about. You design this in a way that makes it look like you're going to do something, but you do the opposite. You're cashewing all of this See, they're so busy with phone calls. Well, go ahead, take the phone call. You can hold my time. I mean, you can take the phone call. It's more important.
10 seconds, sir.
So, you people on this council are garbage. You need to resign, and we need to get 15 people, anybody out of the phone book, but you guys.
Matthew, thank you.
Thank you. After I left Legal Aid in San Pedro, I bought a 5-unit apartment building, and I rented to a friend of mine's cousin and his roommate. This is back in the 80s. Fast forward 20 years later, he's still living there with his wife and child, making $300,000 a year, paying me $920.27 for their apartment per month. When they have 2 domestic workers, one woman comes in and cleans and cooks, and the other woman comes in about 3 o'clock in the afternoon to take care of the child. When they fired the child care worker on a Friday, on a weekend, the sewer backed up, and I called the plumber, and he found a plastic bag that had been flushed down the toilet. I live in 1 unit. I didn't flush the plastic bag. The other tenants were on a bicycle trip. They didn't flush the plastic bag. It cost me $600 to clear the toilet, and they denied liability, even though they pay $900 a month and earn $300,000 a year. I can only maintain a building so long with these type of losses. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Are we, guide me here, can we move these motions as a group, or do we have to move them individually?
You can move them as a group.
As a group? Okay. Do I hear a motion?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Chair, let me just comment. These certainly are, in an era of needing additional housing, we certainly are concerned about these Ellis. We certainly are concerned about these Ellis evictions, and although they've been a relatively few number in CD9, the number citywide is pretty alarming, and I know some say there are loopholes, others say that there's just not enforcement, not enough enforcement, but we need to do a better job, obviously, in how we manage the inventory of these properties. And so I'm prepared to support the motions to move them forward, but we do need to, I think, at some point address these concerns in a way that addresses the issues of affordability and availability.
We will move to combine items 2 to 5 into one council file and have... Yes?
Comment.
I know, I'm not going to...
Go ahead.
I'm going to come back to you.
Okay.
I just want to put on record what we're doing. So we're combining items 2 through 5 into one council file and have Hcid, along with other relevant departments, report back. We move and second to approve all four motions and send to council. With
Thank you.
Comment from our esteemed...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a philosopher from many years ago that I know the chair is very familiar with who had the quote that the government is designed to attend to the affairs of the bourgeoisie. And I think...
Gramsci?
Not Gramsci. And to that end, as a person who's been both a renter and an owner of buildings, it seems to me that there's a lot of protections in place for bad faith actors among people who are either selling or buying property. like one of them is called escrow. And it seems to me that programs that protect renters, like Ellis, like rent stabilization, ought to have something that's like escrow, so that an owner has to go through a process and demonstrate that all these things are true before the person gets evicted. Because once you're evicted, the idea that you have time to go and prove that you were wrongfully evicted is, one, almost anybody who owns a building knows it almost never happens. Anybody who's been a renter who's tried knows it almost never happens. So it's not a real process. And so I would implore everybody who has expertise in this regard and cares about this issue to help us think out ways to put those kind of processes in place so that people are not out on the street and then have to get figured out. The same way, if I go to buy a building tomorrow, I don't have to figure out 6 months later that the guy I bought it from doesn't really own it, because there's a legal process in place to protect me from that as a buyer.
Well stated. Are you prepared to move?
Second, move.
Roll call.
Cedillo.
Cedillo, aye.
Price. Aye. Harris Dawson.
Aye.
Okay.
That takes us to item number 6, budget recommendation for HCID to report relative to the City of Santa Monica's buyout agreement policy.
P. White's sitting right there.
Let's get a second for a breath.
Yeah.
How many more items do we have? How many more items do we have? Okay, item number 6. Mr. Tega, you want to come and talk about the Santa Monica program, their buyout program, and whether or not we have an ability to implement a similar program? Will it require an ordinance to implement, et cetera?
Yes, both the City of Santa Monica and the City of San Francisco have adopted tenant buyout ordinances, and we've been asked to look at the possibility of doing the same in Los Angeles. And we do believe that the city could adopt an ordinance to do something similar. So basically, these are adopted in order to promote fairness in notifications to the tenant and in their negotiations and agreements between the landlord and the tenant, and require the landlord to give the tenant a written disclosure when they're offering to do a buyout agreement with them. So typically, they would be informed that they don't have to enter into such an agreement, that they have the right to consult with an attorney. They have time to, for instance, call the housing department or consult with a legal aid group. They require that these agreements be in writing. So we're looking at something that could be adopted that would be similar in Los Angeles. It would be a little part of the puzzle of addressing some of the testimony that we've heard about tenants that are offered money to leave rather than being extended all of the full protections that the rent ordinance would provide for them. So we have a transmittal in process to be forwarded to you that would propose something similar for the City of Los Angeles and would provide tenants with just better information up front about what they're getting into and their right not to accept such an agreement. And full information about the full relocation benefits that they're legally entitled to under the law.
Okay. Mr. Hayes, Dawson Hayes. Questions? Mr. Price?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Wayne, I don't see him in the room. Mr. Wayne, if you are, there you are.
Yes, sir.
Obscured, but now evident.
So, how much are these tenants going to get for this buyout? Forgot to mention the Benjamins, the money. You got to mention the money. How much for the money? And then, of course, a tenant has the right not to accept the agreement. And, of course, nobody's going to take that tenant and threaten that tenant and take that tenant and lock them in a trunk for a couple hours and make them decide to take the offer, right? You open one door to corruption, another one follows. Of course, they're going to be pressured to take this deal. But how much is it? You don't say numbers. Dinero, shekels. How much money is going to be given to these people to waive their rights under the act and leave the city? But anybody that can be paid to leave this city, I fully support that, by the way. That's a good thing. Everybody should be given $1 million to leave today. But how much? You don't say.
Thank you. Is that it? Do we? Yeah, so let's adopt the motion and instruct Hcid to report back with recommendations on a possible buyout program in Los Angeles. Motion? Second? Move, second? Second? Roll call necessary, so be the order. Aye. Move to general public comment? General public comment. Wayne?
So, again, I would really like especially to thank Jose Huizar for attending this meeting today. And, I know it was hard for him to get here, and he's just been attending every meeting, hasn't he? Never misses a meeting. No. So, what did we see here today? Let's see, the destruction started with item number 1 and all the poor little building owners that are going to get socked with a notice of violation, which is going to decrease the value of their properties and limit their ability to get affordable insurance on their properties, and marketability if they want to sell or refi. They're all going to thank you when they get those notices. They are going to have a shit fit when they get those notices, okay? So you need to get a legal firm. A class action needs to be filed for the tenants and the property owners against this evil, vicious, maniacal city. 2, 3, 4, 5, I put in cards on each item. I only got 1 cumulative minute, and again, you violated the Brown Act.
Sylvie Shane, thank you, and John Walsh.
Thank you. Sylvie Shane, I just wanted to address one misconception. We talk a lot about the 5-year return provision as if beyond that there is no protection. And in fact, the Ellis in section 7060.2 under C, the time period can actually be extended to 10 years, and it's up to the discretion of the city to enact that, basically. And I mean, it's padded into the law itself. So I highly encourage you, please, to investigate that and to extend the re-rental rights to the full 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a card for John Walsh. I don't see John Walsh. That completes our public comment. Motion to adjourn. Moved. So be the order. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.